Okay, so yes, you will have just got a notice too that there's a recording in progress. I hope if you don't want your face on screen, you can just, you know, turn your video off. Oh, great to see all these contributors here. Hello, Di and Deb. Can't see everyone, but thank you. So thank you to all those contributors who've come tonight. It's my privilege now to introduce our first speaker, Moira Rayner, who for many Australians needs little introduction. For me, her name comes linked to social justice work and advocacy, especially for women. Moira Rayner is a senior lawyer with expertise in workplace relations and anti-discrimination law. She is a conciliator, mediator, and educator. She chaired the Law Reform Commission in WA, was Commissioner for Equal Opportunity for Victoria, a Hearings Commissioner for the Australian Human Rights Commission, and an Acting Anti-Corruption Commissioner. Her research and other appointments have included University of Melbourne, Advisory Board Labour Law Centre, Senior Fellow, Deakin, Adjunct Professor, Centre for Human Services, RMIT, Adjunct Professor, School of Social Inquiry, Murdoch, Visiting Scholar, UWA, Lecturer, Senior Fellow Law School, Visiting Fellow at the Australia Centre, and Curtin Lecturer and Australian Institute of Family Studies, Deputy Director, Research. I was delighted to hear that Moira had agreed to launch this book. Thank you and welcome, Moira. Sorry.
Thank you. I have written far too much, so I will not gabble. I may leave stuff out. But I personally acknowledge that I am physically taking advantage of the theft by non-Indigenous people of the land of the First Nations, and I shall have more to say about them. Personally, my physical body is located in the library of a stone Victorian terrace, which was once a brothel, which we call old, but was built a mere 150 years ago, and now shudders beside that 8-lane highway known as Huddle Street, which was built on Wurundjeri country of the Kulin Nation without their permission. Our antecedents, I wasn't born here myself, I was born in New Zealand, but I do acknowledge that I have some sort of blood connection to the Little Digger, the former Prime Minister Billy Hughes, through my maternal grandmother. I can't help that. Did not know or value the stories and culture of the Indigenous people who set up this tremendous network of countries within Australia whose culture has survived for maybe up to, or even more, I don't know, 65,000 years, the longest living society in this on this planet, and well before our European traders, exiles, capitalists and carpetbaggers arrived, took what wasn't theirs and told them they were savages, which they were not. I was honoured to be invited to share in the launch of this remarkable book, and properly humble when I finished reading it, because it's a hugely warm and hopeful collection of stories, ideas, art, poetry and spirituality, which hope for and can actually show a possibility of collaboration between arts activism and scholarship. And I'm quoting from one of the significant contributors to that book. And I thought I might take that idea about stories and tell you two or three before I see you shivering, moving around in your seats. And the first one is about respect for First Nations stories. I came to Australia in 1965 from New Zealand, and I came in the middle of growing an understanding about the dreadful acts committed by my great-grandfather, the Minister for Native Affairs for New Zealand in 1883. His name was John Bryce, which is a name in infamy in Maori law. It's because of this growth that I embrace as true the principle that you cannot have peace and reconciliation unless it is founded in justice, compassion, respect, and dignity for First Nations, wherever they are. In my family, we were taught that John Bryce, great-grandfather, had been defamed by John Rusden, who was the historian of New Zealand early in the piece in the 19th century, who claimed that he had brutally destroyed a Christian pacifist settlement led by a charismatic prophet called Te Whiti on unceded land in Taranaki, a land called Parahaka. It is true that my great-grandfather won his defamation act. Oddly enough, he chose to sue in a London court, not in a New Zealand one. And all of the children of our family have a copy of the transcript, such as it was, and of the judgment in our libraries. Now, I'm a lawyer, so I need to point out to you that that transcript shows that the witnesses for the historian who documented what he had done were not able to travel to London for the hearing because, 1, they were Maori, 2, they didn't speak much English, 3, they didn't have lawyers, 4, they didn't have any money, and 5, such evidence as they provided was taken down by Pākehā scribes in simplistic statements taken out of context of the questions put to them, which meant nothing to an English court, and which awarded the judgment on a technical reading of those texts. My great-grandfather had led a militia of mercenaries and volunteers who invaded Parahaka, tried to provoke an armed defence from the thousands of men and women there and didn't get it, but destroyed the fields, the farming implements, the homes, the schools, the church, and arrested and jailed all the men. Under legislation my great-grandfather had put to Parliament, he'd already removed all civil liberties, right to a trial, treaty entitlements and physical freedom in legislation which he had put to and had passed through New Zealand's chambered parliament, single-chambered parliament. The ability to be seized, jailed and kept in jail until you died without any charge because you were Maori was unique to Maori men who might pose a threat. It was utterly shameful, and my great-grandfather's claimed to have done it because he'd been attacked by Maori during the land wars, which had preceded his rising to the great heights of being a minister, and which were triggered by ongoing breaches of the Treaty of Waitangi when it was never established. In fact, I learned later that my great-grandmother saw a tribe of warriors during the land wars walking through their land and thinking she was going to be slaughtered, stood on the veranda and stared them down. I have inherited her look. She was so effective that they kept walking. And one of them later came around and asked for a job so he could work for the brave Pākehā woman he was told to piss off by my great-grandfather. So I want to hear stories which are different from the ones that my family found comforting. I want to hear about the massacres, the extrajudicial killings, the secret cutting off of trophies from the bodies of those killed, the burning of the dead, and the abuse of Aboriginal women and children. And I want to do so not because of the black armband, as John Howard would call it, view of history, but I want to do so because of the need for a culture of listening with respect and of accepting the need to make amends. In Parahaka, they had 4 or 5 apologies before they actually bit the bullet and started giving reparations for the theft of their land. That land had never been given under British colonial rule under the Treaty of Waitangi. And a pacifist Christian leader was led to a miserable death in detention, quite unfairly. The second point I want to make is about the sense of urgency that I now have. I know that those who wrote for this book are aware of the 3 major challenges we have at the moment, which didn't come out of nowhere. One of them is the out-of-control pandemic, dividing the rich and poor even further. Another is the clear indication that the unknown effects of climate change may be much worse than the ones that we have predicted. As the snow disappears so rapidly, islands sink and it's too hot to live in certain parts of the world, including our own. And the third one is the political fumbling to avoid addressing any of these issues, which has led to a lack of trust of the people in their leaders. This has led to secretive and authoritarian decision-making with public assurances that we can go back to the way it always was, and the abandonment of old ethics and ways of being, encouraging the breaking up of ties between workers and the arts, which were abandoned, the habit of cooperating and trusting in one's relationships with others, and respecting difference. Now, here's another story that I want to pass on about why, and one of the articles in this book actually deals with it, why we used to have a non-nuclear proliferation policy which protected us from having a nuclear fuel dumping or industry on Australian soil. It was entered into because of our experience of previous tests of the British government on Aboriginal country after the Second World War. That was, in my humble, and I don't have humble opinions, but jurisprudentially unlawful. And if it wasn't unlawful, it should have been at the time. And we've learned since that time that it is a win that we lost very recently with a facile announcement without the pretense of a mandate or any written agreement by our Prime Minister announcing a pact with the United States and the United Kingdom, basically to establish a nuclear industry in Australia. This is catastrophic in my view, because of what it says about our autonomy or otherwise, based on the alleged fear of an attack from China. Believe me, a nuclear submarine or 5, or how many, would be the last instrument of warfare on a ruined planet at the time that it's delivered, if it ever is. So here I stand, I can do no other. So said Martin Luther when he decried the corruption of the Catholic Church and was hauled into judgment. Didn't end all that well, really, but nonetheless, sometimes these things just have to be said. And it was a statement of one needs to say one's truth. This is what the contributors to this remarkable book have done. They demand a proper and measured acknowledgement of past hurts. What I found fascinating was the idea, which is typical in Maori tradition as well, of telling stories until the stories are all told and we understand one another. I believe that we must do something, and this book made me feel hopeful about changing the ways in which we measure the happiness or otherwise of people in terms of the operation of the stock exchange, and the pretense that unemployment or employment records are dropping, and that we should go back to the old ways of opening up the economy to buy, consume, sell, and profit from those who may not work but do invest and exploit our natural resources. My third story, if I may put it, it's pretty well the last one, is the importance of remembering, and remembering accurately what actually happened. When I read Jason Kelly's story about his experience as a member of the First People's Assembly of Victoria and the importance of acknowledging the wrongs, I thought to myself that I've had plenty of experience of that in my lifetime. But what I'd never done was write down my own little experience when I was, as Commissioner for Equal Opportunity, asked to help to fight the closure of Northland Secondary College. Now, Northland Secondary College was a secondary school which was remarkably successful in immersing its students into their local community and their cultures, which acknowledged the trauma of young people's lives, the effective dispossession on Indigenous students, and which treated all children, no matter their lack of wealth, possessions, and their diversity of backgrounds and experiences, a place to be respectfully listened to. But especially they gave Aboriginal children the respect and dignity of choosing how they wanted to learn and when and how they wanted to learn it. And as a result, they made something very special, a school where Indigenous children got to year 12 and beyond, though they've been written off by the system that they had been brought into, the education system, which did not respect their views. I got involved in it because Jeff Kennett called in another Jeff to help him close down the school because it was unusual. And Jeff Spring had closed down the schools which in the Northern Territory were teaching Indigenous students in their own language and culture because they thought they should be brought into the mainstream. Northland Secondary College was closed down after a series of breaches of faith and trust and on a spurious ground. The kids were chucked out and locked out. The school was not maintained, of course. And Gary Foley and other parents who had kids there decided to run a rebel school and kept up their education informally. The importance of my participation in a study which was funded by a large grant obtained by one Gary Foley, who some of you will know has been a prolonged anarchic successful advocates for Aboriginal respect and acknowledgement. And eventually, because I accepted it, did not accept Jeff Kennett's instruction to close it down because he thought it was government policy, so none of my business. And I referred it up to the Equal Opportunity Board, which said it was discriminatory to close it because it's the only school that was getting marginalised kids into proper education. Eventually, but it took 2 years, the case was won in the Supreme Court of Victoria, to my astonished delight, which found that closing down the only school that worked for Aboriginal kids was racially discriminatory indirectly, and the school was ordered to reopen. But in the 2 years that it took, and there were 2 students who took the case, many of those children died, ended up out of education, and or it ended up in jail. So having refused to accept Jeff's instructions to reject the complaint, they abolished the position of Commissioner for Equal Opportunity not long afterwards. It was expected, and I'm not saying that was a wonderful thing to do. It was what the law required. And I'm saying this because it was important what the law required. And I'm saying it's important because Gary got a PhD in the history of Black Power movement in Australia, and because he then became a professor at Victoria University and then got a huge grant to record this battle, which has been wiped out of the Education Department's history. Doesn't get a mention even when they're running for, as if it was brand new, schools in New South Wales in which that kids are taught in their own languages and own culture. And because we recorded those stories, those of us who were involved, students, parents, teachers, teachers' aides, and in my case, a very minor person who was able to give them an actual effort as challenging the Supreme Court of Victoria to uphold the very flawed equal opportunity legislation that we then had. So I want to leave this at this point pretty well by saying I cannot pinpoint the many stories that I found hitting me in the solar plexus and recording memories from me. What I mostly got from reading the stories, looking at the art, reciting the poetry, because that's the way I think poetry should always be spoken, and keeping the pictures around my little office, as you can see here, is that social justice and justice can only emerge if not only you have laws which require that you cannot just dispose of them, which currently seems to be happening rather a lot, at least at the federal level. What you need, apart from laws and tribunals and independent courts and a process which people rely upon as unbiased, the rules are never enough. On page 88 of this book, Justice Windayer of the Australian High Court, whom I first saw when he was asleep on the bench when he was visiting Western Australia and sitting in the Supreme Court hearing some application for an appeal. They used to come around in those days and actually meet with legal practitioners and participants because there wasn't a High Court building in Canberra, and I'd love to see that again. So they actually travelled. It was pretty good for us. He was quoted as saying that the law is always in the rear and limping a bit when it comes, broadly speaking, to social issues. And that's absolutely true, because most people cannot get a legal representation to deal with gross injustices and social issues unless they manage to get somebody other than the youngest article clerk in a very large law firm which is prepared to teach young lawyers how to make mistakes at the expense of people who aren't paying their fees. If I sound a bit cynical, I am really. There are some pretty good people around, but this is an issue. Now, the reactive nature of law, the author says, has worked reasonably well to regulate issues between humanity, but the question for our time surely is, as she says, whether humans collectively are affecting the planet in uncontrollable and unforeseeable ways that can generate into existential international problems. So how can we use the law so that the slow processes can be adapted to enforce change that is as effective as those who have lots of money and a lot of time, as it does by those who can crush the people who are oppressed and weak by giving the human voice of the people a place to go. I have found that the final comment I make is about the spiritual energy I find in every part of this collaborative publication. There is a very great need for collaboration between those who care about the sort of society we're living in and those who are aware that the place is becoming potentially a dreadful place for species other than our own and for our children, grandchildren, and other living things. I was going to quote from, and I will not at this point, they quote from a friend of mine who I met on Twitter, of all things, who has decided that he knows how the world can deal with climate change, and he's actually living it. He says that I'm not going to read it all, but he says that the really important thing to do, and governments nationwide need to accept, and they'll only do it if we speak loudly and authoritatively, the only way to reduce emissions today is to reduce energy today, not in 10 years' time when you've decided to have an electric car. That is a madness. Today, in the real world, we have exactly what we need in energy sources. We need to reduce emissions and change the way we live. And his answer is, and I love it, slow down, slow down. The way to reduce energy is to slow our physical speed of transportation and our expectations of where to get what we need. The plan is to reduce the energy we expend to something which over time would enable us to get a direct reduction in the time we take to get what we need and the response to those who wish to sell us things and expend a lot of energy by making sure that up to 250 years ago, the model that every human being on earth had was that they could get everything they needed to live their lives within walking distance of where they woke up in the morning. There was no other way to get it. They weren't all dropping dead. And it's a common belief now that this is impossible, but he says, I'm living the life. It's impossible without a transition, but nonetheless, the point is slowing down. You don't have to go a long way to a great shopping centre. And in time, the government of the day will make sure that you don't have to fly the food we need to eat across vast spaces. Slowing is the keystone, the linchpin. Speed requires pavements. Speed requires oil and emissions. Without it, every road in our country could be one donkey cart wide, and he uses donkeys in his farm, with room to pass. And we could tear them all up, all the separate stones, airports, parking lots, and the races. They're all for speed. Speed eats carbon out of the atmosphere. Speed is what something does not need. Speed is something we do not need, because if we slow down, we can actually manage our lives in a respectful and decent way. So my final remark is this: the spiritual energy in every part of this collaboration is based on hope. I felt very hopeful at the end of it, because it is quite clear that collaboration is what makes living manageable, even under crisis situations. If I was still a Presbyterian, I might mutter something along the lines of, what does the Lord require of you? Act justly, love mercy, and walk humbly with your God. But since I'm no longer a Presbyterian, it ran away from me. I won't say that. Instead, I would like to echo what my friend in America said in his meditation on the future: slow down, don't rush, work to making sure that everything you need is within walking distance. And as Freya Mathews says in her poem towards the end of the book, let walking be your ground state. She, as a lawyer, I was attracted to this. She says, let your work, your via activa, be tending it, that is the earth, attending to it, learning its law, turning its pages, deciphering its scriptures. And she concludes, as I am about to, all there is this law. Follow its course. Bushes will burn for you, manna will fall, pillars of cloud will join you as escort, and of revelation, beloved, you will never be short. So I don't know how I say I break a bottle of champagne and launch this book, but I would say to you, it is a treasure. Consider it launched.
Thank you so much, Moira. That's wonderful. I will say a little more by way of response shortly. But thank you for your stories. And I will say a little bit more later on. For now, we're going to hear from one of the contributors, Alex Skovron. Alex is the author of 7 collections of poetry, a book of short stories, and a prose novella. Letters from the Periphery, his latest volume of poems, is published this year. Towards the Equator, published in 2014, was shortlisted in the Prime Minister's Literary Awards. Alex's work has been translated into several languages, and his numerous public readings include appearances in China, Serbia, India, Ireland, Macedonia, and Portugal. He was born in Poland, lived briefly in Israel, and arrived in Australia aged 9. Alex will read his poem Hands, which responds to William Kelly's artwork, The Arrival.
Thank you very much, Anne. It's a real honor for me to be involved in this project. I really appreciate the opportunity and to be introduced to William Kelly's wonderful artwork. So as Anne has mentioned, this is Hands, and it responds to The Arrival from William Kelly's Asylum Folio 2014 to 15. Hands. What hands are these? To whom do they belong? Why do they droop as if resigned or trapped? What is that yellow pleated cord? Can it be strong enough to bind them both? Could it be snapped if the two hands would clench and pull apart? But wait, the right hand's fingers, oddly gapped, as though half trembling, twisted, scarred from some ordeal. And the thumb, is it lost or subtly concealed by the camera's art? And then see how wearily the hands lie crossed, each along each, to nourish the blackness glaring behind their pallor. Hands of a ghost or sheer despondency, a defeated slackness that sickens the will, pushing hope aside? And have these hands arrived from some luckless encounter, or about to be taken on a silent ride to nowhere, to travel forever, or only as long as our heart is wanting and our hands are tied? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alex. So it's my privilege now to introduce our next speaker, Angela Costi. Angela Costi, also known as Angeliki Costi among the Cypriot Greek diaspora, is a Melbourne-based author of 5 poetry collections. The most recent, an embroidery of old maps and new, and we might get an image of that in a minute. Yep. Anyway, this is her most recent. City of Melbourne funding is supporting her to work on a new poetry manuscript, The Heart of the Advocate. Angela was born in Sydney from Cypriot Greek parents who left because of poverty and civil unrest. Her poetry explores and interrogates intercultural, multicultural and cross-cultural existence in Australia using English, Greek and the Cypriot dialect. She manages Angela Costi Poetics, a Facebook page dedicated to reflecting on the poetry writing process. And welcome, Angela. Don't think we'll need the image up while Angela speaks.
Thank you for having me. As guest speaker and co-launcher, I'm honoured to be being part of this wonderful event and to be following the wonderful speech of Moira Rayner. So I too want to begin by acknowledging that I'm meeting with you from the land of the Wurundjeri, Wai Wurrung people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respect to their elders, past and present. Also, I pay respect to all First Nations people and their descendants who may be with us today. I acknowledge my accountability and unwavering allyship for First Nations people seeking justice for all historical and systemic wrongs they have incurred since invasion. At the outset, Cloud Climbers, the book, is an ally to First Peoples. In the earlier part of the book, we learn about Jason Kelly, a Mati Mati Wamba Wamba man, and his work with the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria. As Moira also stated, Jason explains how truth-telling is the core towards progressing successful treaties. Delivering the truth with its horrors, cruelties, and indignities within a circle of empathy and equality is also at the core of Cloud Climbers. This is a book with a significant vision. It brings renowned thinkers into a communal space like a galvanising symposium or an inspiring protest. Each thinker, by activating their various practices through arts, poetry, speeches, and essays moves us towards a just and ecologically sustainable, peaceful existence. This vision is steered by Anne Elvey, the editor, also an esteemed scholar and poet, who has thought deeply and carefully about each contribution. From start to finish, each piece speaks to the other, exposing the causes of atrocities to our planet, finding the commonalities, and igniting a collective spirit towards change. The wise discourse and reflection throughout challenges the multiple violences of racism, sexism, misogyny, classism, speciesism, by bringing to the fore responses and emotions of generosity, kindness, and empathetic imagination. William Kelly's 9 pieces of art, 2 of which are collaborations with Benjamin McKeown, provide the framework from which the poems and essays interact. The art aligns with the vision. It achieves a fine balance between urgency and intimacy in telling the story of the world we have inherited and created. There are striking images of interracial love and hate, nuclear inheritance, institutionalized child abuse, white hands tied by cord to herald the arrival of servitude and slavery. And then there's the tenderness of siblings united in sleep, a long-stemmed rose to soften a man's still gaze, another rose to bridge the gap between adversaries. This art, by arresting the gaze, enables the much-needed pause to view the juxtaposition of error and grace, to meditate on contrasts and comparisons before marching ahead. And so, William Kelly's art, on its own and in collaboration, holds true to his reverberating quotes. Although it may be said that a painting can never stop a bullet, I know that a painting can stop a bullet from being fired. This art that holds the bullet to account has also birthed 5 poems by accomplished poets. These ekphrastic poems are all masterfully written. They add valuable discoveries to enrich our gaze. Bella Lee provides a timely warning within her poem 8193-2, taking us on an apocalyptic journey involving a space travel disaster in view of Earth's collapse. Based on the evidence proffered in several essays in Cloud Climbers, including Joseph Camilleri's essay titled Finding a Path in the Midst of Crisis, Bella's poem is more fact than fiction. Susan Feely's poem is titled, How Many Times Must I Send You Into the World? That title alone is heartbreaking, as it forewarns of a 4-part poem distilling images of robbed childhoods, including the tragic death of 3-year-old Syrian refugee Aylan Kurdi. Alex Skovron, in his poem Hands, asks the questions we must all consider to determine our complicity in the multitude of harms, historical and current, that have caused hands to be restrained. While Andy Jackson interrogates his response in a poem that doesn't shy away from the haunting of the Hoddle Street Massacre and its impact on faith. This poem, with all the other poems in Cloud Climbers, achieve what Rayner Maria Rilke declares a poem must do. It takes you to the very end of an experience, to the point beyond which no human being can go. The further one dares to go, the more decent, the more personal, the more unique a life becomes. Each life, human and other than human, or can we say better than human, is exalted in this book. We are not overwhelmed and undermined by numbers, statistics, graphs, and percentages associated with deaths from global greed and negligence. We have the stories, the people, the movements, Extinction Rebellion, School Strike for Climate, Journeys for Climate Justice, the Jess Project, to name a few. We have the 4 entities ascending and descending ladders, sitting and viewing from clouds as witnesses thinkers, activists, or as Anne Elvey states in her powerful poem, they are the Malache Hashalom, the angels. Rung by rung, there is a way to arrive at the clouds so that we can see all pains and wounds earth endures, and more importantly, to resolve how we can heal her. It's no accident that the book is coded in red, the colour of humanity's warning. Together, the art and poetry make compelling declarations towards a sustainable existence. In that spirit, I declare Cloud Climbers co-launched into a stratosphere that repels any further billionaire toxicity. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Angela. I love the energy of your words and appreciate so much that you talked about the art and the poetry together. That's wonderful. Moira, thank you so much for your difficult, painful stories, for pointing us in that direction. And I wanted to cry hearing again about Northland Secondary College. I remember going when they started the sort of rebel school, going over to see if I could offer to, it didn't come off, but to offer to teach maths there because I had formerly taught maths. But yeah, cross stories that intersect with one another. I really liked that you talked about the urgency and the spiritual energy and respect and collaboration and hope. And Angela too, thank you so much. I think I don't want to take up a lot of time, so I just say a couple of words about the book. But thank you both for your powerful words. The book came out of the Earth at Peace conference held in April 2019, just prior to Anzac Day. Actually, there's a companion academic book edited by Joseph Camilleri and Deborah Guess called Towards a Just and Ecologically Sustainable Peace, which was published and launched last year, also on Zoom. So both were part of the Just and Ecologically Sustainable Peace initiative led by Joseph Camilleri, but also part of a larger project that had started off as ecological aspects of war. Specifically, Cloud Climbers, as Angela has said, and took shape around 5 ekphrastic poems in response to William Kelly's artwork and displayed as part of his exhibition Just Art, curated by Christina Roundtree at Centre for Theology and Ministry in Parkville. The exhibition was timed to coincide with the conference, and an Anzac Eve event in collaboration with Medical Association for the Prevention of War featured readings of the poems, a choir, harpist Cath Connelly, who will play for us in a moment, and a speech from activist Dr. Ruth Mitchell, which became an essay in the book. And it's so exciting that we got that the international campaign for the abolition of nuclear weapons got enough countries and are still getting more countries on board so that it is actually in international law now. I'm not sure, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not sure of the exact details of how that law works, but they reached their milestone and they're keeping going. So effectively, nuclear weapons are illegal. The book is thus an expanded connection to the event that held in 2019, and it takes its name from the artwork by William Kelly, Witness Cloud Climbers 2, which features on its cover. As I mentioned earlier, the book has 29 contributors, and I thank all the contributors. I noticed quite a number of you here. Especially William Kelly and Benjamin McKeown for their artwork, Joe Camilleri for his vision. And also I want to thank Sally Gardner for her editorial expertise, not only to the press for taking on the book, but for her expertise in pushing me to make it a better book. And Ian Robinson, the wonderful designer, who has made, as Bill said, he's made the book itself a work of art. And thanks to, I don't know if Christina's with us, but thanks to Christina for curating the Just Art exhibition in 2019. And then just for financial support, particular thanks, and many of you may be here, to the network of supporters Joe Camilleri has built up around the Earth at Peace project, to Pax Christi itself, and to University of Divinity for research funding. There are more thanks about funding in the book, but they're the main sources, I think. Finally, my deep appreciation to Duncan Reid, Anne Carson and Dan Disney for their lovely recommendations, for taking the time to read the book and for the recommendations. So thank you again to Moira and Angela for your wonderful, energetic and engaged responses to the book. At this stage, had we been able to meet in person, there would have been at readings, as we had sort of hoped, but I had a feeling it wasn't going to come off. I would have presented you with a small gift, like something floral or something drinkable, or both, you know. So in lieu of this, you might find a small gift in your email later this evening with our warm appreciation. If I don't get it done this evening, it'll be in the morning. So it's ready to go. But so now, after all this speaking, it's my pleasure to introduce Cath Connelly. Harpist Dr. Cath Connelly is a spiritual director, supervisor, retreat leader, pilgrimage facilitator, and keen beekeeper. She is author of Handbook of Hope, Emerging Stories Beyond a Disintegrating World. So she's a woman of many talents. So I invite you to relax and listen for the next few minutes. Thanks, Cath. I think Cath she's ready.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cath. That's so lovely, and just right after we've had lots of words. So now we're going to hear from William Kelly, without whom this book would not have happened. So it's my privilege and pleasure to introduce him tonight. William Kelly is an artist, pacifist, husband and father. Having once called a park bench home, he is a former steelworker, truck driver, Fulbright scholar and former dean at the Victorian College of the Arts, Melbourne. He is now recognised internationally as a leading artist activist whose aspirations for a more compassionate and environmentally sustainable world resonate through his artistic enterprise and life, leading to his receiving awards for human rights and social justice on 3 continents. His work is the subject of a feature film, Can Art Stop a Bullet? William Kelly's Big Picture, and I hope if you haven't seen it, you do get a chance to see it. Having grown up in New York, he now lives in and maintains a studio on Yorta Yorta country in a small bush town in rural Australia. Thank you, Bill.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm hoping that you can hear me. That's thank you. I thought I'd just take one quick step back when you mentioned, and thank you very much for bringing up that I live in Yorta Yorta country. That a large part of my youth was spent growing up in the country of the Iroquois Confederacy in New York State. You may recognize the accent, although I do try to pass it off as being from Paran. It doesn't always work. And there's a special thing that I learned from the Iroquois, especially the Seneca people, who are the keepers of the Western Door, that they are the ones who initiated the phrase "bury the hatchet," which was quite literally taking the hatchet, that weapon, and putting it in the ground and planting the seed of a tree above it so that it would then help to create a positive environment. And that's a good start for someone who came from the background that I did, and the experience that we have now to actually think about taking these steps that people have towards creating violence. We see billions spent on submarines and the military, and these tools of death are being masqueraded as implements of peace. And we know that there are other ways of doing this. And I so much appreciate being a part of the book, but also having the relationships that have developed with the various poets that Anne has introduced me to, and Joe. And we have to make no mistake about it. Art, when they use the word art, they use the word creative. And this book is a celebration of creativity. It's a celebration of trust through collaboration. And to collaborate, we need trust, and we need faith in each other. And we need to understand that we need to listen as well as act. And it's also a guide, a roadmap. It's these wonderful writers in here, and those who have just commented are in their own way wayfinders, helping us to negotiate our steps forward into this somewhat unknown but future which we hope to turn around for our kids and grandkids. And we must never mistake love for weakness, or weapons for security, or retribution for justice, or force for right, or winning, right, for being ahead, whatever that means. So I'm honored that Anne has included me as a part of the project. And this is now part of this international arts movement, which has linked, and it's been mentioned a couple of times now. It's taken this, having been an academic to some extent in the past myself, it's taken this discussion of academics on the one hand, and this artists or creative people on the other hand, as they say, and brought us all into the same camp, because we are all part of the same people on the same journey. And I'm hoping that one day that there is a peace economy that will rival that of the military economy. That right now, one of the things that hamstrings us to a certain extent is that the money is clearly sort of, in the direction of militarism, not in terms of bringing our youth up with sensitivity and fostering education and that, but to develop these what they call defense, but offensive systems. And I think that one day also that these images and texts that have been put together have growing from a very conflicted present that we're experience right now to create pathways to positive futures. So I'm honored to be part of this. I'm so immensely grateful to all those who have contributed and are contributing this evening. And I am an optimist in the face of all sorts of things in my life and in our world, which might point in the other direction. But if we do not act, we will not have the results that are required. So thank you, Anne. Thank you for everyone who's put the book together and all those who are participating this evening.
Thank you, Bill. I love Bill's background with his artwork behind him. Thank you. So I think we're up to Jione. I'm delighted to introduce Jione Havea, and we just have one of the artworks while I'm introducing Jione. Another contributor to the book who is reading for us tonight. Jione Havea is a native pastor, Methodist Church in Tonga, and co-parent for a, I think, 7-year-old, unless she's added another year since I wrote this, since I had this, who is troubled by Disney's Moana. He writes, "We are migrants that live, work, play and dream around the land of the Wurundjeri Nation. We live for and because of stories written and oral. We tell and twist stories, and stories twist and pinch us back. Before COVID, we participated regularly in the gatherings of the Society of Biblical Literature, Oceania Biblical Studies Association, Society of Asian Biblical Studies, DARE, Discernment and Radical Engagement, and Talanoa, Oceania." Thank you, Jione.
Koreke o whanga i ngai whatapu. Hine te aparangi sighted a long body of cloud over the horizon, and she called out, "He ao, a cloud, a cloud." With her husband, Kupe, they discerned that land must be under the cloud. So they directed their wakahorua, their voyaging canoe, to the cloud. And as they hoped, they found where whenua, land, under the ao, cloud. Hine te aparangi and Kupe are remembered as the first native Maori family to land on the group of islands that they were later called Aotearoa. Ao, cloud, Tea, white, Roa, long, affectionately called today as the land of the long white cloud. After citing invasion, settlement, Christianization, and colonization by Europeans, the Aotearoa Islands also became known as New Sea Land, New Zealand. Over land, our cloud attracts hope for rain. In the moana, the sea, our cloud feeds the longing for whenua, for land. In both contexts, in moana and over whenua, in the sea and over the land, our cloud is in the sky above, but under the sun, the moon, and the stars. Kia ora.
Thank you, Jione. So you can see there are hearing Alex, listening to Bill and seeing his artwork, and listening to Jione, what riches are in this book. And there's more to come tonight. We're going to hear in a moment from the publishers, and then from Freya Mathews, Rose Lucas, and Joe Camilleri, and then wind up. So books with many contributors and illustrators don't necessarily find publishers easily. It is my pleasure to introduce publisher and editor Sally Gardner, and I think Paul Komensaroff. Sorry, I might have said that, messed that up. I didn't write it down because I only found out recently that Paul's going to join us too. They will speak on behalf of Palaver Press. Sally is an honorary research fellow at Deakin University, member of the advisory board of Palaver Press, editor and publisher. A former dancer, Sally was senior lecturer in art and performance at Deakin University from 2004 to 2017, co-editor of the journal Writings on Dance from 1985 to 2012. That's pretty impressive length of editorship. And co-editor of Continent of Flame, Responses to an Australian Catastrophe, which came out last year. Thank you, Sally. And Paul.
Thanks, Anne, for your comments. And thank you too for mentioning Ian Robertson earlier, our book designer. Palaver is the initiative of Paul Komensaroff, whom many among you may know as a tireless campaigner for social justice, working at both the level of the clinical encounter in healthcare and in promoting and furthering reconciliation dialogues and processes in Australia and overseas, in particular through the NGO Global Reconciliation, which Paul co-founded, and now through its online platform, Aid Exchange. As a publishing entity, Palaver aims to support manuscripts with an ethical theme or focus. As part of that project, we've been keen to publish work that speaks not only through prose, but also through visual and poetic means. Cloud Climbers is indeed a book that encompasses a range of registers aimed at poetically and politically activating as well as intellectually engaging readers. The book's editor, Anne Elvey, is a real agent for change, as are the many contributors. It is gratifying that Anne and her colleagues find a central place for poetics and for aesthetic appreciation in social activism. It has been a pleasure to work with Anne and to help bring this collection of committed declarations to its present form. This launch of Cloud Climbers, as others have noted, is very timely. The book is uncannily prescient, coming as it does, just as the new so-called AUKUS Pact is announced, with its nuclear submarine deal and the spectre of US bases, heralding the likely need for reigniting and revisioning anti-nuclear and anti-war movements in this country. As Cloud Climbers publisher, Palaver is proud to be part of such movements, and we hope that the book will help to fulfill the important task that drives it. Paul, would you like to make a few extra comments?
Thank you so much for those lovely words, Sally, and thank you everyone else for being part of this wonderful event. I'd just like to echo what Sally said, that we're, as Palaver Books, we're honoured and proud to be part of this wonderful project. Palaver is an independent, not-for-profit publisher that seeks to keep alive the idea of independent thought and critical discourse. We're looking for new projects all the time. We'll be very lucky if we find a project as wonderful, as creative and innovative as Cloud Climbers. So thank you so much, everyone, for your participation, and we wish you all the success with this work. Thank you. Thanks, Sally. Thanks, Anne. And thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Sally and Paul. Lovely to hear from you both. And it's wonderful to have a publisher that, you know, will take a chance on something like Cloud Climbers. So thank you. I'm sure someone should be putting into the chat how to get the book, either from Joe has some copies to sell as part of the launch, but otherwise we can, if someone could put the link in the chat to the Palaver site too, that would be great. Okay, so our final two readers from the book are, and here is another image of Bill's. Peace Not War, Bridge Builders. Our final two contributors reading are Freya Mathews and Rose Lucas, and you will have heard Moira quoting from Freya's poetic poem, invocational poem earlier, and then Rose will read for us, and then after Rose, Joe will more or less finish us off, and I'll just close proceedings after Joe. So I'll just ask Freya, Rose and Joe to follow on one after the other after I've introduced them. Freya is Emeritus Professor of Environmental Philosophy at La Trobe University and a Fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities. Her books include The Ecological Self, Ecology and Democracy as editor, For Love of Matter, a Contemporary Panpsychism, Journey to the Source of the Merry, Re-inhabiting Reality Towards a Recovery of Culture, Idea, a Philosophica Novella, and Without Animals, Life is Not Worth Living. In addition to her research activities, she co-manages a private conservation reserve in central Victoria. Rose Lucas is a Melbourne poet and academic at Victoria University who lives and works on unceded Wurundjeri land. Her first collection, Even in the Dark, won the Mary Gilmore Award and was followed by Unexpected Clearing. This Shuttered Eye, a study of poetry and the visual, was published earlier this year and well launched. And with Pauline Breitling, Rose runs the newly founded Liquid Amber Press. She works on collaborative projects with visual artist Sharon Monagle. And Joseph Camilleri probably needs no introduction. He is Emeritus Professor at La Trobe University, where he held the chair in International Relations from 1994 to 2012, and was founding director of the Centre for Dialogue 2006 to 2012. He is a fellow of the Australian Academy of Social Sciences. He has authored or edited some 30 major books and written over 100 book chapters and journal articles covering dialogue and conflict resolution, security, the role of religion and culture in society, multiculturalism in Australia, and the politics of the Asia-Pacific region. Freya will read her poem Invocation, Let the Mountain, followed by Rose reading her 2020 lockdown poem, Streets of My Isolation, which seems appropriate this evening. After them, Jo will offer a vote of thanks before I send us off to read our copies and buy further copies as gifts for friends and family. Thank you, Freya. And then you can hand on to Rose.
Okay. Thank you, Anne, and thanks so much to you and Jo for inviting me to be part of this collaboration, which, as we can tell from this evening's testimonies, is very inspiring. I'm just going to read a short poem, this invocation. Let the mountain be your temple, the forest your cloister, the river your pilgrim path. Let the animals be your sangha, the birds your angels, the insects your Indra jewels. Let elephants be your prophets, whales your gurus, dolphins your blessed assemblies. Let the desert be your doorstep, stars the needles of beauty that open your wound, sky your liberation. Let mosses be your worlds within worlds, ferns your lacy raiment, fungi your labyrinth. Let fossils be your relics, boulders your old folk, grottos oracular your holiest of holies. By the elements be tested, by the terrors chastened, by the hungers of predators apprised as flesh of your place. Let walking be your ground state, cognition, communion of the human with its very ground. Let earth be your soul, its inexhaustible life, your inexhaustible life, its mystery, your mystery. Let your work, your via activa, be tending it, attending to it, learning its law, turning its pages, deciphering its scriptures. Let planting be your prayer, knowing what to plant and where, your wisdom. Let protecting, preserving, restoring be your worthiness, observing its results, your bliss. All there is this law, follow its course. Bushes will burn for you, manna will fall, pillars of cloud will join you as escort. Of revelation, beloved, you will never be short. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Freya, and thank you, Anne, Palaver Press, and it's a great privilege to be in this book with so many wonderful writers. It's really a great experience. And yes, as Anne said, my poem is a lockdown poem written in 2020, and it seemed like a long lockdown then, but of course that's a long time ago. And I guess it really comes out of all the discombobulations that the lockdown and the pandemic have brought, you know, to ideas of self and community, of inside and outside, work and domesticity, etc. But I think also, you know, I guess it's a poem of celebration about the way in which difficult times can also be a very profound kind of teacher, actually. And maybe the teaching I found most moving, most compelling was to go back to Moira's comment, the slowing down. Some things zoomed, didn't they? But other things slowed down. So let me read from the book, Streets of My Isolation. These rhythms of walking, footpaths, topping and tailing, long days of inside, where traipsing, unmoored, past our neighbours' fences, wooden picket, Brunswick green wire, low brick, across gutter and macadam, past ornamental plums shading into a red and yellow swirling at our feet, while wattlebirds and lorikeets flock and squabble in flowering gums, scattering rosy pinkness like confetti, their raucous calling filling the street, waking late sleepers or magpies trawling across grassy verges, listening and warbling to each other, gardens tended, dark soil, freshly turned, silver beet rising in the salvia bed, and the end of the roses caught for the table, while hips darken towards winter, we greet each other with nods and a wide berth, apologetic, our conversations reaching out like streamers while we move apart, festooning the neighbourhood with looping nets of touch and hold and uncertainty, a weave we have never made or noticed before. It cradles us. Together we are suspended above fear's turbulent currents, our feet crisscrossing these streets, these rhythms of walking. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It has been, I think, a very, very unique experience for which we are all deeply grateful. It's been a unique and perhaps an unusually uplifting experience in times of pandemic and lockdowns. Because what I think the book has done, and we're deeply grateful, all of us, I think, to all the contributors, I won't mention them all by name, what they have done in so many different and mutually reinforcing ways is to emphasize the value, the vitality, the importance of communication and the various media that are available to us for pursuing, engaging, communicating with others. Through the written words, the spoken words, through prose and poetry, but also through art and through music. And that, I think, has been, if you like, the defining feature of this, what is now a 3-year-old project that is coming to an end. This is, if you wish, the final act of this 3-year project, which began organizing sometime back in the middle of 2018 and had a very significant forum as its first initiative back on Remembrance Day 2018, the 11th of November. And then the conference, the art exhibition, the cultural evening, the showing, the special showing eventually when COVID would allow us of William Kelly's The Big Picture. And then the book that Anne has referred to, and now this book. And it's been put together by Anne meticulously and with consummate skill. with empathy for the various media that we have used to make the project possible, and in particular this book. And with sensitivity to all the contributors, and with attention to meticulous detail. For that, Anne, we are very, very deeply grateful to you. So I hope that this product, which emerges from the collective efforts of the editor, all the contributors, and of course the publisher, and the many who have supported the project along the way, will bear fruit as more and more people read the book, use the book, make the book available as a gift, use the book in educational ways, particularly in perhaps school contexts and even in university contexts, where particular texts, particular pieces, particular artwork can be subjected to careful reflection. And I hope this will therefore continue the work of Earth at Peace project, even as it comes to an end in an organizational sense. So as with the previous book, and perhaps even more so with this one, this is an opportunity to ensure that the project continues. And of course, we know that all those who've been involved, both in the book and in the project more widely, which we've called Earth at Peace for short, have gone on to do many other things, extraordinary things, and they're continuing to do them, each in his own or her own way, but in many cases collaboratively. And in fact, it is that project which has inspired to a considerable extent both me and many others to launch this new project, Conversation at the Crossroads, which I will briefly mention. I mention it because it too is very much concerned to link together the various forms that we have to communicate with others, exactly as this book does. And to do it as a key to addressing the critical issues that will shape the human future. And we are moving towards a major project. This is a 2-year-old initiative, Conversation at the Crossroads, to which you're all welcome. We're moving towards the launch of a new project, Conversations That Matter, which will be launched on the 24th of November, as you can see. You'll all be getting information, and please make the word go round. We hope that by the 24th of November, we will have both an in-person event as well as an online event. And the online event will, I hope, have a very important international as well as Australian dimension. So I see this project, this initiative, very much as being in line and in significant part inspired by the Earth at Peace project and by the thinking and insights that we find in Cloud Climbers. So all it remains for me to do is to wish you the very best, hope that you get some enjoyment from reading this book and making it available to others, and that Earth at Peace and the notion of a just and ecologically sustainable peace will live on in all the engagements, the various and diverse engagements that we will continue with in order to give effect and life and nourishment to these ideas at a time when they are so sorely needed. So once again, thank you to everyone who has contributed and to all of you who have attended. And I look forward to continuing engagement with you all.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you, Freya and Rose, for your lovely readings. So all I need to do now is once more thank Moira and Angela for I'm feeling very moved by their speeches and all the readings and the wonderful readings from our contributors, Alex, Jione, Freya and Rose. Thanks for our publishers, and particular thanks to Joe for all his work helping organise and promote the launch, and to Ben Freeman, who has been keeping this moving along very smoothly. I think much more smoothly than if we'd all tried to share our screens as we went along and so on. So thank you, Ben. And thank you everyone for coming. And I think we haven't done too badly. We're only 7 minutes over time when we say good night. And some of you may need to go and have dinner as we do. So thank you everyone. So good night.